Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this week's edition of Fake Accents Unite. I am joined this week by a sparse panel, but the favourite panel nonetheless, of the Britisher. Good evening, sir.
Good evening. How are we doing?
I'm quite well, and yourself?
Quite well. Yes. More of the emphasis on quite in my case. Yes, but I'm can't complain.
We will leave it at that then, for the time being. I do want to start off today in the somber tradition, as it were, of the Armistice, and just reminding everyone who is unaware that if you're from abroad, it is Remembrance Day today. It was Remembrance Sunday yesterday, and I'm going to just start the stream by saying what is considered the traditional verse from a poem called "For the Fallen" by a chap called Lawrence Binion, which basically sums up the entire sentiment of Armistice Day. And it goes something like this, okay? So it goes, "They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun, and in the morning, we will remember them." And obviously we would normally observe a minute's silence, but most people who are going to do that have already done that. I just thought it was good to highlight the start of the stream with something with the sentiment of the country behind it, especially in an era when a lot of places do not want to acknowledge Remembrance Day. Have you seen any of the news on this, Britisher?
People not wanting to acknowledge Remembrance Day.
Oh, okay.
No, I can't say I've heard that one.
Okay. A couple of really silly stories. One of them was someone decided to wear a rainbow poppy, and it was unaffiliated with LGBT stuff. It was just a poppy with the rainbow colours, and it started a fight in some bar somewhere. The usual stuff from Cambridge and Oxford of student unions saying, "Does this glorify war?" and the usual stuff. I mean, last year, me and Sarah did a whole stream on a Cambridge student union when they decided that they would remove a remembrance installation, an art installation of poppy crosses, because they believed it was glorifying war, and some stupid activists who have no idea about either their heritage or any kind of semblance of the day decided that they would come and cause a ruckus. So all that fun stuff usually going around again, but not too much of it this year, although I expect maybe some stuff will come up in the next week or so. Could be fun, maybe not. The Nvidias has donated £2, says still 92 seconds late. Thanks, mate. Appreciate that. Looking at the chat, I can see the Harry channel. I can see Laconic, Colin P. Smith, the regulars in. Nice to see you guys. Polyfants, haven't seen you in a while. That's good to see you. And it's Lest We Forget Day. So, what was I going to say? Oh, yes. For some of you who have been on Twitter, the big story of the day, from me at least, if I just share this via OBS right here, this window capture, you can see a Times article. I will link it to you, Britisher, in stream chat, which should hopefully come up for you. There we go. And it says, "Students turn against free speech amid a culture of conformity." And they've got a lovely stock photo, which claims it's from Alex Cavendish, an Alamy stock photo. But this picture here is actually me about a year ago. Well, a year and a half now, April last year. Just taking a sip of my...
No doubt at a what I think would generally be referred to as a fetish meet.
Oh yeah, clearly this is my fursona. This is my costume. Basically, this outfit here that I've got going on. Let me just pull this away from here. I don't want the YouTube chat to get in the way, so I can keep looking at things right. So I can keep abreast of the chat and that sort of thing, right? This is actually at the Free Count Dankula March, back when that was a big thing, back in April 23rd or something like that last year, and I was still running the Liberalists at that point, and we were basically we went and protested. There were about 600 of us in London, and we marched down the street. This banner here is actually a mock-up of the British anti-piracy ad, the you wouldn't steal a handbag, you wouldn't steal a car, you wouldn't steal a television, and it says you wouldn't tell
most annoying clip in human history.
Yeah, but also memorable. So good on the marketing team for that one. And it says in the same style, you wouldn't tell a joke. So I've still got that banner around somewhere. I did contemplate having it at one point as a background, kind of like a studio background for my channel, but it's actually incredibly heavy. And I can't stick it up on the wall because
you don't think the wall would support it?
Well, no, I tried it. I tried blue tack. I tried hooks. I tried all sorts, and it's just one of those things where really I'd have to screw something into the wall in order to make it fit, and it just doesn't work. And my landlord would not be very happy with me. But yes, and thankfully I have a little extension on, because this is a Times article, right? And you must subscribe to the digital pack for instant access. Or you could just go and download Firefox and have an app called Unpaywall, an extension, which gives you access to the news site for free. So I don't have to support the mainstream media whilst critiquing them, of course. This is an interesting article because this picture here does not represent like the battle for free speech, but it does talk about how students are against it. So if I read this out to you now. Fewer than half of students consistently support freedom of speech, and 2/5, so 40%, favour censorship and no platforming of controversial speakers. That's a huge percentage, 4/10. A culture of conformity may also be having, and I disagree with this one, a culture of conformity may also be having an effect on undergraduates who are often too intimidated to espouse unpopular views on campus, according to a report by the centre-right think tank Policy Exchange. And they say deep-rooted reform is needed at universities, which we already know, which should establish academic freedom champions reporting directly to the Vice-Chancellor, it says. I disagree that it's about intimidation. Most of the people I know who are, shall we say, out-and-out not leftists are quite happy to say so, especially in the political forum of something like a politics society. But there is a real sensation of just being in the minority, and there's this idea that you're sitting there in a group of people, and there's 10 people sitting in a group, and they're all talking about how much they love Diane Abbott, and that is not a hypothetical situation. I genuinely had someone who goes, "Oh, I don't think Diane Abbott's that bad. Oh, I think she's been maligned. Oh, I think she's not good with the figures, but and the Labour Party doesn't really want her doing interviews, but she keeps on insisting on doing them, and really she's shooting herself in the foot with this, but she shouldn't have to know these figures anyway." And I was like, oh, for goodness sake, I can't be doing with that.
I find it interesting. It's the flaw of having her in a London constituency.
Mm-hmm.
Because Diane Abbott must, in a way, be... I mean, in all fairness, it's perhaps slightly unfair on him, this comparison, but I think you'll see where I'm coming from.
Mm-hmm.
Are you familiar with John Prescott?
I am.
Yes, I mean, John Prescott, for those people who don't know, he was the kind of tub-thumping left-winger who is kind of often referred to as the sort of the heart or the conscience of the Labour Party during the Blair years. The problem was he would get his stats completely mixed up. He would sort of get himself tied up in knots and be completely befuddled by things. And the way they solved that is I think he represented Hull in, I think that was his constituency. And what they effectively did is, okay, John Prescott, he's Northern, he speaks Northern, so what we'll do is we'll stick him on a bus and we'll send him up north. And what that meant is they got him out of the Westminster bubble.
Yeah.
So all the BBC journos and, all the other journalists of The Guardian and The Times and The Sun and The Daily Mail and The Independent and, the whole racket, they are, of course, all circling around Westminster, all looking for the latest, the latest press conference and whatever. Whereas John Prescott was deliberately just got out of the way of the whole thing and, sent to Rotherham or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And it kind of, at one moment, it was good politics because it meant that he was in the Labour heartland, speaking to them in a manner that was sort of much more appealing to them rather than, having to listen to Tony Blair. But at the same time, the main aim of the whole thing was just to get him out of the way.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you got him out of the way, he wouldn't say something that the next day the press would use to crucify Labour with. The problem with Diane Abbott is she is in a London constituency.
Yeah, and she's been there for 20 years.
There is no putting her on a bus and sending her up north, if you know what I mean.
Can we send her across the channel? Or perhaps into it?
Mind you, there was an attempt of that backfired, wasn't there?
Oh, I can't remember.
Was it the Ed Miliband election? I'm not sure. Was it Ed Miliband or was it actually the Jeremy Corbyn one? I'm not sure. Where Harriet Harman was put on a pink bus.
Okay. That wouldn't fly today, but yeah, go on.
And everybody was sort of thinking, well, hang on a moment. Here is the militant feminist, the women's thing, the women's champion, the women's whatever. And she's on a Barbie pink bus.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Maybe she could have sold it as
herself.
Maybe she could have reclaimed the color pink.
Yes,
or
yeah,
something
of course,
along those lines. It's like, this color does not define me. It is merely an affectation that I have.
How shall we say? It looked like something Jordan might arrive in, if you know what I mean.
Okay, or Paris Hilton, perhaps.
Yes, yeah, along those lines. By the way, I need to forewarn you here.
Mm-hmm.
That somewhere, perhaps 10 minutes, quarter of an hour from now or so, or perhaps later, depending on when it arrives,
the kettle will boil.
Precisely. I might have to step away. Well, I will have to step away because there will be a grocery delivery.
Not a problem. We will make do without you for that period. But yes, when it comes to Diane Abbott, actually, I was surprised to find out that I could respect Diane Abbott on one thing. Do you know what it might be?
I wait with bated breath to hear what it is on which you respect Diane Abbott.
Okay, this one thing that I can act like, and I've done videos absolutely taking a massive dump on her, and for good reason. But and to be fair, this is the only thing I've respected her for in 26 years. So there is that. But back in the 90s, when she was running, also people in chat want you to list your groceries on stream, by the way. But Diane Abbott is one of the only female candidates. However, we call it under the misapprehension that she is leadership material, who consistently puts herself forward for leadership of the Labour Party. And it's one of those things where you go, the balls on this woman. And I can respect the fact that she must know how her approval goes and what her voter base is and who is actually going to support her. But out of all the women in the Labour Party who are constantly moaning, who are constantly feeling maligned about the fact that they receive abuse and there's not enough women in politics, and there's this it's a man's world, I found out that out of the women in the Labour Party, because they're the party with the most female candidates, out of the women in the Labour Party who could stand for election, only 2% actually did, who could stand to go for the highest office in their own department. So I can actually respect the fact that Diane Abbott actually puts her heavily weighted foot where her mouth is on this and actually stands for it. But that's the only thing I can respect her on. I don't respect the policies she stands on. I think that it's a good thing that she has not become leader of the Labour Party, although it would be hilarious. But yeah, that's my general thing. But I hope that's a surprise for everyone. Oh, look, how many people are leaving the stream. It's shocking, really. Yes. What do you think about that, Britisher? Do you think that's something which you can agree on with me, or are you just like, you're mad?
Effectively, you respect her for the fact that she is one of the few people who actually is willing to stand for office.
Yeah, and as much as I abhor her principles, if I believe she has any indeed, The fact that she's actually willing to put her money where her mouth is and go for that, I think is.
I'm not sure. I think it's. I mean, I don't like using this term because I think it's a bit like Nazi and whatever. It's well overused, but I think in her case it might well apply.
Mm-hmm.
And that is, are you familiar with Dunning-Kruger effect?
Dunning-Kruger. Rings a bell, but not off the top of my head, and of course some in the chat may not know, so do expand.
Oh, well, if I'm not misremembering completely, and no doubt I will be told that I've got it entirely wrong, but this is basically people who have, how shall we say, who are not necessarily all too smashingly bright, concluding, largely due to their inability to actually weigh things up correctly, that they are geniuses. And that that any complications that other people might foresee, because they can actually sort of weigh up odds and whatever, is actually to their minds just because everybody else is an idiot.
Oh, you mean the hubris angle?
So I think when it comes to Diane Abbott, I'm not really sure whether I would put her down. When it comes to someone like David Lammy, I think I would regard him as more intelligent than Diane Abbott. I think he is much more cynical. I think he knows what he's doing.
Well, he certainly has.
When it comes to Diane Abbott, I'm not sure. I'm not sure whether this is just cynical race baiting and whatever, or whether this is not just not knowing any better.
There's possibly an angle in that, but I'm more speaking to the underlying. Even if she has a misalignment with the world, I think it takes a certain something in a person to say, I believe X, and because I think she's putting herself forward due to her personality.
I want to change the world and stand for it. Yes, but what I'm trying to get at, if you actually think that you are the next best thing since, I don't know, Charlemagne,
canned bread,
Gandhi, Martin Luther King, Julius Caesar, Napoleon, Abraham Lincoln. Do you understand what I mean? If you really feel that you are kind of in such august lineage, is it then still you're having the bravery to put yourself forward, or is this more a matter of you being ready to step into your well-deserved destiny and lead mankind into a brighter future?
You think she says it's merely a self-fulfilling prophecy at this point? I deserve to lead the country. I am the person who should lead the country, and it's going to happen. I don't necessarily get that from her. In the same way that I get it from someone like Michael Gove, say, who seems to think it's his God-given right to run the country. But no, I know what you're saying. Michael Gove, the man who thought that it was good to stand in the Conservative leadership election on the policy of going with Theresa May's withdrawal agreement and thinking that would win him the support of the Conservative
the man who actually enabled Theresa May to become Prime Minister in the first place, by stabbing the now Prime Minister in the back.
Yeah.
It's interesting, isn't it? The man who said that he didn't think Boris Johnson was fit to be Prime Minister in the speech which he held at the precise moment when he was stabbing Boris Johnson in the back and thus enabling Theresa May to take the premiership unopposed, because Andrea Leadsom stood aside once the whole sham had been operated and Boris Johnson was effectively manoeuvred out of the way.
I really want.
Yeah, I would love to hear a in-depth interview with the supposedly so intellectual Michael Gove. Yes, Rubber, I'm talking about you. I would love to hear
You mean Rubber's close personal friend, Michael Gove? Yes.
Yes, Rubber Duck. Yes. When when it comes to that chap, I would love to hear a in-depth interview with Michael Gove about his present day opinion regarding the suitability of Boris Johnson to be Prime Minister. Particularly given the present timing, that would surely be a stellar interview to conduct, wouldn't it?
I really want my Twitter feed to be filled with Darth Abbott and Darth Gove memes after this stream concludes. I think that would be great. Let me just... I'm going to save the super chats until it's time for the Britisher to go. But apart from the ones which are obviously Britisher related.
Yeah, I just wonder how you handle those super chats, because on my
you flooded with them, are you, Britisher?
I've got these super chats coming in, and the only way I've found that I can kind of handle them is by having them on the YouTube screen, rather than sort of trying to find them in the chat itself.
I mean,
the problem is, on the YouTube screen, if it's beyond so and so many words, it doesn't all fit in. So you effectively have to move the mouse over it in order for it to highlight in full, which proves somewhat tricky at times.
Apologies, chat. Let me just deal with the boomer for a second.
And then you've got people in the sort of the chat sort of saying, "Oh well, total boomer doesn't know what he's doing" and whatever. And you're going, "Well, I'm sorry, folks. You do realise I'm doing 13 things at the same time, and I have no idea how this operates."
For the sake of your stream, Britisher, I have YouTube Studio open. I have it says Stream Settings, Analytics, Viewer Activity, and Stream Health. I click Viewer Activity, and it gives me a itemized list of all the super chats that come in, and so I don't need to deal with trying to find anything or dealing with any text.
Yes, but when you look at the itemized list, don't you get a lot of comments that are, "I think such and such about such and such ...
No.
Oh well.
We will have to discuss this afterwards, but I can give you a hack around that anyway if you're getting that. Not to worry. What were we talking about? We were originally talking about students. We were talking about the culture of conformity.
Well, I was prepared to just talk about anything but any more about Diane Abbott.
I see, exactly. Let's go back to this the Times article featuring Not So Obvious. So they asked some questions. They said some student views. It says, should the Conservative MP Jacob Rees-Mogg be prevented from speaking on your campus? Agree 26%, disagree 52%, and don't know 22%. Which is interesting. I wonder how many... Unfortunately, it doesn't tell us how many students they actually asked. Because if it says something along the lines of fewer than half of students consistently support freedom of speech, and the sample size is something like 20 students... That's not really a helpful sample, but yes.
Yes, but I think experience would kind of teach us that. I mean, they're not making this up, are they? I mean, we do know from experience that there are substantial numbers out there.
But what I do also know, interestingly, is that an awful number of students are so lazy that they will not look up anything. So if they say, "Oh, should controversial..." So here's one of the questions. Should Cambridge University have rescinded the controversial academic Jordan Peterson's fellowship? Agree 41%, disagree 31%, don't know 28%. It's one of those things where you just go, aside from the fact that the question itself, but the framing of the question makes it so much so that if anyone has not done their research, they go, "Oh, someone who's controversial. Yeah, of course they should be free to do that." And as someone who's more liberally minded when it comes to what effectively business decisions are, and universities being businesses in my mind, they're totally free to cut ties with whoever they want. But so when it says, "Oh, should Conservative MP Jacob Rees-Mogg be prevented from speaking on your campus?" That 22% don't know figure is really a fraction of the the disinterested student base in my mind. So I don't know how biased this is going to be. I tend to find that the don't knows are people who've done their research. The agrees are people who have only seen the meme of him falling asleep in Parliament on the front bench, wasn't it? And they go, oh,
In all fairness, I think that was him sulking. But that's another.
Whatever that happens to be, But these things where they get a flash in the pan of someone, and all they know about him is effectively the tags of he's a bit of a toff, he's on the front bench, and he's pro-Brexit. And I don't like Brexit very much, so yeah, he should be prevented from speaking. If he's a Tory, he probably wants, and he sounds like he's from old money, so he probably wants to privatise the NHS. I don't like that. He shouldn't be allowed to speak here. But free speech has not been a priority on campus for a long time, certainly in this country. I don't think that people understand the value that it holds. I also don't think people are confident enough in their own positions because they're either too busy or too disinterested to back up their opinions. And if you can't back up your opinions, you don't really want to engage with those opinions unless you've got a lot of time, because you're going to come across people who are slightly more, what's the word for it? Abrasive, I suppose is the word. People who are going to shame you and in fact stigmatise you for not knowing your facts, which is a real shame. The interesting one for me is this question here. It says, should Cardiff University have prevented Germaine Greer from speaking after she was accused of transphobia? Now that's obviously an interesting one, because again, in the framing of the question, it is not was found guilty of transphobia, but accused, right? And agree 44%, disagree 35%, and again, don't know 21%. And you just go, why should 44% of people agree that someone effectively should be have the right of rebuttal removed after she was accused of transphobia? Especially someone like Germaine Greer, who obviously historically was quite a large mover and shaker in the feminist movement, whatever you think of her positions, if anything at all. I just find it
Professor Germaine Greer.
Sorry?
You mean Professor Germaine Greer, not just Germaine Greer. Professor Germaine Greer.
I'm just saying what the question, how the question is phrased, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's one of those things where you just go, I do not understand particularly the mindset which would say, no, this person who comes, because an accusation is as good as a condemnation, and as good as a ruling against someone. It's fascinating to me, this massive increase in, or what appears to me to be a massive increase in the social weight of an accusation, as opposed to the value of the discussion with someone who has had an accusation leveled against them, because accusations are obviously something which happen all the time. You're a racist, you're a bigot, you're a communist, you're an idiot, all these things. Someone should have the right of reply. That's the whole point of the free speech system, is really right of reply, aside from the catharsis angle, as far as I'm concerned. What do you make of this, Britisher? Would you say it's something which is not a new phenomenon? Would you say it's shifted from right to left?
I think you're looking at this a bit too sort of technical from the perspective of whether one has the right to reply.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think, how shall we say, if one would take this same thing and one would ask that same question about what was that transgender person called? The model who basically got selected as the first model for L'Oreal or something like that, and then after a while was undone. I'm sure.
Are you thinking of the Labour, like Monroe Bergdorf or something?
Yes, that's the name. Yes. So if one were to suggest that person come to university in order to talk about controversial claims and this, that, and whatever, would the people respond in the same way to say, oh, well, if it's controversial, then we wouldn't have this person here? No, they wouldn't. Because this is the good controversial person, as opposed to Germaine Greer, who is the bad controversial person.
Oh, because yes, the dinosaur controversial person.
I don't think this is about the controversy, or this is entirely about right think and wrong think. And when it comes to the orthodoxy that is set in now, then Professor Germaine Greer is the wrong thing. The reason I like to always highlight the Professor Germaine Greer is to basically indicate here is the person who dug her own grave. She was heavily involved into introducing this nonsense into academia.
First place, yeah.
And now she is being buried by it.
Yeah, it's a kind of poetic justice to her. At the same time, it's still not a great thing.
Oh no, it's hideous. It's absolutely hideous. But, as far as I'm concerned, the problem is wrong think and right think. It isn't that these people are sort of being led by leading questions.
No.
Because I don't think you would be able to do that if the controversial person coming to campus would be Munro Bergdorf or some such person. Because they would be controversial, but only guilty of right think.
I think I found
that same reaction.
I think I found my next social survey to pioneer under the psychology department. Anyway, you're right. Here's an interesting thing, though. When you say obviously, so here's the two questions, right? Which were: should the Cambridge University have rescinded controversial academic Jordan Peterson's fellowship, and should Cardiff University have prevented Germaine Greer from speaking out after she was accused of transphobia? Do you notice how they've removed the honorifics? It's not Dr. Or Professor Jordan Peterson's fellowship. It's not Professor Germaine Greer's thing. This is an interesting thing that I've noticed recently, is that people will quite often, as I say, remove the titles and the what's it called, where it's like the post
anything which would grant them a certain amount of deference
and legitimacy is in their field.
That is taken away by those people to whom you do not wish to award it, and it is heaped upon people who have made absolutely ludicrous studies on, transgender 7-year-olds being the savior of Western civilization, that sort of thing.
Because again, like I remember when Jordan Peterson was at the height of his controversy, and you say his peak was probably the Kathy Newman interview, and it was at that point where he had to say to her, and she was like, "Oh, I'm not an expert, but here's my question." He was like, "Yeah, but I am. I am an expert."
Yes, there was that. But there was that question: was it, who are you to say this?
It's like, well, I've been studying it for 40 years.
He just leaned back and said, I'm an evolutionary psychologist.
Seriously. I'm a clinical psychologist. I've been studying this for nearly 30 years. It was what possessed me through my youth. I studied authoritarian regimes for 15 years before I wrote my first book. And it took another 5 years on top of that to write it. Regardless of what you think about Jordan Peterson, you can't shit on basically his information gathering and the amount of time it's taken him to think some of these things through, regardless of his current troubles as well. But it is interesting to me that you will try and defang your political opponents by removing the symbols of their office, the symbols of their position, and anything which would give them an air of authority.
You will describe him not as Professor so-and-so. You will refer to him as YouTube personality Jordan Peterson.
Or yes, you'll try and reduce him, as I think journalists in particular try to reduce him to the level of a journalist, where effectively the highest term you could come up with for a journalist is political pundit, right? As opposed to someone like, say, Roger Scruton, where you would say, oh, it's Dr. Roger Scruton, and he's been an authority on aesthetic and beauty for nearly 50 years. It's not, it's not, and you want to reduce him to someone who thought about something for a weekend and then posted an opinion piece on The Guardian. You know what I mean? I think it's an interesting strategy, and I'm not entirely sure how to correct it, other than having to go through the motions of correcting people every time. They basically fail to give you the respect that is due your position.
Well, I think we have to be careful with the respect that is due your position, or with effectively deliberately trying to undermine somebody. It's I think there is a difference between that. I think one can be too bowing and scraping, always considering that not all academia is academia. You know.
Yeah, no. So it's when you're describing someone, you're saying, well, it's doctor and what that doctorate is in, and things like that, and it's going. So it's more about if you know someone is really solidly based in a just really solidly based, as the academic would say, the academic agent would say. No, if you're really solidly based in your discipline, it's not enough to say. So take one of the people who tried to pull the respect me due to my position angle, and that's the chap who said biological sex is not a thing. Do you remember that from a couple of years ago? And he basically said, so he came on to, he was on the BBC, I don't know, balding effeminate chap, and he said, I am a professor, I'm a professor of history of medicine. Exactly right. I'm an expert in the history of medicine. It's like, no, you're not a doctor. You're trying to make out that you're on the same level as a doctor, but you're not a medical doctor. That is, and it's so when people list their credentials, they're quite often seen through. Whereas if you take, as I say, someone like Jordan Peterson, who has actually done more than any racial activist, for instance, to close the racial achievement gap in universities with his self-authoring program, who has, these 2 books that he's released and all the research that's gone into it, and everything that is chronicled online, etc. You can tell. So, for instance, at my university, there's a doctor. I won't name her. But she is the only lecturer who I had at that university who gave a lecture where she out and out said at the very beginning, I am only going to give the feminist perspective on this, and the only reason I'm going to give that perspective is because it is correct. Because it is the critical perspective. And therefore, because it is a critical perspective, I have no need to have counter perspectives, because
someone else would say, it is based.
There are no other critical perspectives, of our position, because ours is the critical perspective. Therefore, I'm only going to present this one. But if you look at her compared to the other ones, she, in terms of the amount of time that she's been a lecturer, the amount of time she's been a scientist, in her own words, and the number of citations that her work has achieved compared to anyone else in the department, she has something like over 15-20 years, 58 citations. Which, given that the newly joined clinical psychologist to the faculty that we have over here, who has only been working for 3 years and has over 400 citations for her work on hippocampal neurogenesis, it's one of those things where you go, it's really hard to take you seriously when your work is so unrecognizable and so, shall we say, unvalued by the scientific community. The biggest thing that she has going for her, and the reason that she's still around, is that she can be the diversity and inclusivity officer for the Department of Education and Health, and she can continually put forward a survey every year for the prevention of sexual violence on campus, which is obviously a hot topic at the moment, and they want to keep, I guess, like on the down, down, even though the university that I live and work at is just not known, shall we say, for its high levels of rape and sexual violence and all these things.
I just had a thought. How you referred to her being this lady being the diversity and inclusivity officer.
Yes. As well as being insufferably white. Yes.
Would it be apt to refer to the diversity and inclusivity officer as the 21st century social justice shop steward?
That
previously everywhere we had to have a union representative.
Yeah.
And that was the shop steward. And now we've kind of introduced a new layer, and that is the diversity and inclusivity officer. When it comes
to the diversity and inclusivity stuff, I actually find interestingly, that there are several people who I would actually trust in, not in such a position, but to further the agenda that they want to in that position. And the agenda that they want to further is that if we have, shall we say, a large number of people from a particular part of the world, then you want someone who will understand the cultural concerns of that part of the world, and therefore be able to deal with it. So, for instance, we had people who were who struggled with the cultural clash of coming from the Far East, China and that sort of thing, and how differently things were done over here. And I don't think that it's unreasonable to say that it would be helpful to have someone who they know that they can contact, who they can talk to, who's been through this stuff, who understands what it's like over there and that sort of thing.
Yeah, but that isn't really what those officers represent.
No. What ends up happening, because the chap got the position in the end, and I was like, I'm happy to throw my support behind you compared to all the others who are basically racial activists, and he was like, fine, but he ended up finding that for a start he couldn't do anything that he wanted to do when it came to that. But secondly, and it was all about quotas, and basically he got morphed over the course of, I would say, as little as 3 months into someone who basically ended up furthering a racial agenda because that was what was demanded of him by the faculty, and he wasn't happy with it at first, but then his personality changed, and he became quite happy to do it through the course of things. So it's difficult. Interesting that he was someone who he originally came from India, and he would get quite uppity about that. He'd be like, "Oh, it's so easy to get clinical experience in the psychology field. I just go back to India and I work in this hypnotherapy clinic." And it's like, not everyone could go back and work in a hypnotherapy clinic, man. It's not the way it works. Anyway, enough about that. Has your grocery shopping arrived yet, Britisher?
No.
Okay, I shall press on with another story and hope that it shall go on beyond the time that goes there. So, did you see Joe Swinson's car crash interview with Andrew Neil?
I can't say I have, no.
So, for anyone who doesn't know, Andrew Neil basically had Joe Swinson on, and he pulled up one of their Liberal Democrat leaflets, which said something along the lines of, you will, you're looking at Britain's next Prime Minister or something like that. That was the hook for the thing. Andrew Neil just put his down and says, here's some of your propaganda. And, but I know, the British people know, and everyone in the other parties know, you're not the next Prime Minister. I just told her flat to her face that she was not going to be the Prime Minister of Britain because nobody liked her.
Well, I remember seeing an interview with another Lib Dem candidate in which that poor woman was desperately insisting that British politics was nowadays so volatile one couldn't rule it out.
Let me see if I can find this for you, because I'll play it for the chat and I'll play it for you. I'll send it to you on the thing so you can watch along at the same time. Joe Swinson, Andrew Neil. Let me see what we've got. Filter. Upload date. Sort by upload. Oh yes, here we are.
I'm joined now by the Liberal Democrat leader, Joe Swinson.
Welcome. Find it in here.
Now,
with you, Andrew.
You've been instrumental in making this election happen, so why have you risked going down in the history books as the party?
Joe Swinson, you're not going to be Prime Minister. I apologise to anyone who's listening to this. I can't see it on here. Maybe it was on Twitter that I found it. If someone could link that to me, then we'll talk about that in more depth, but I just can't find it for the time being. But on a similar note, I do have Caroline Lucas, who was discussing...
She telling us what she was going to do if she was going to... she was Prime Minister.
So basically, she was caught in a coffee shop wearing an enormous poppy. And the chap there said, what do you think about the Liberal Democrats basically, going on this pro-Remain campaign? And she said, if you wanted to send a message to 17.4 million people that you don't give a fuck about what they just said, why don't you just say so? It was just quite blunt from her. I don't think we are seeing a Green Lib Dem coalition anytime soon. That's all I'm saying from that one.
Well, it's funny because they have sort of they've not done a coalition, but they've got a sort of alliance of sorts, whereby they isn't it in various seats they are going to stay out of each other's way and also Plaid Cymru.
Well, the Greens are obviously they only have 2 seats as far as I'm aware.
I think they've got 1 seat, Brighton.
Yeah, they have Brighton, but they got some more last time, I thought, which was a big win for them. Silly Sailor sending me a link here. Let me see what we've got. Something went wrong. It's not ideal. Here we go. Thankfully, there's enough of a buffer on the old Streamlabs that it's going to be fine. I've seen the full interview, but that I just want the clip. I want a specific clip that goes through. No, he's sending. Oh, Joe Swinson Fantasy Politics Destroyed. It's about 8 minutes long.
And she said some.
This is someone else's take on it.
No one stands as a candidate.
So I'm not. I'm not going to go through that. But thanks for trying there. Basically, it's funny when it comes to Caroline Lucas because she's always been sort of seen as a little bit of a nutter. When it comes to things, like obviously Brighton loves her, but in general,
she was the MP who got told off by Burko of all people for walking into Parliament wearing a T-shirt that had the slogan "This is what a feminist looks like" and blazoned on it. And he basically told her that was you couldn't wear political slogans in Parliament, and could she please leave?
Yeah. It's like Caroline Lucas is a bit of a paradox to me. I don't see why she's alienating what is effectively the closest thing to support that she has. Because in the instance of a hung parliament, I have no doubt that she will immediately rescind this comment and join forces with the Liberal Democrats. Like that is obvious. The Green Party, the people who vote for the Green Party, small in number though they may be, are almost overwhelmingly going to be in favour of Liberal Democrat policies over Labour and Tory policies as they are now. Perhaps more in favour of Labour, but definitely leaning towards the Liberal Democrats. And I don't see why she is committing political suicide. Not that I'm against it, If she wants to commit political suicide and ruin the Green Party everywhere except this one constituency.
Well, I mean, in what way? I don't quite understand. How do you think she is ruining? How do you think she is?
No. So what I'm saying,
political suicide for the Greens.
In the best possible sense, the best that the Greens can possibly hope to do, because at the moment, shall we say, environmentalism policy interest is at an all-time high. You've got all the Extinction Rebellion stuff. If there is an election in which the Greens are going to do well, if they can market themselves effectively, this is that election. And this is a time where this is their Lib Dem moment, effectively. Back when the Lib Dems were trying to push themselves as an alternative third option back in 2000, when they went into coalition with the Tories under Nick Clegg. So if this is going to be their moment, when people are most interested, and I don't see why alienating their biggest bastion of support for a coalition government that they would be looking for is a good move by them. Unless, of course, she didn't realise she was being recorded. But I don't think that's the case. I think it was obvious she was being recorded.
I mean, you never know. I mean, there was that famous one, wasn't there, with our favourite John Prescott, where he was being interviewed and he kind of fumbled the line, and they just went, "Oh, sod it! Can we do that one? Can we do that one again, please?" And the reporter kind of had that sort of cringe moment just for a second or two before informing him, "I'm afraid we're live."
Yeah. Well, it's funny, whenever you mention John Prescott, it reminds me of what's his face, Frankie Boyle, before he turned political. I mean, he's always been relatively political, but him ripping the absolute shit out of John Prescott for being basically a fat bastard, and now and now that he is basically a full-time writer for the Guardian and a political pundit for the Labour Party and Momentum and socialism as a whole, it just amuses me that
I didn't know that. I didn't know that Frankie Boyle had gone completely. For want of trying to avoid the word bonkers, let's just say completely political.
Oh yeah. So he basically, when Indie Ref for Scotland was coming up, he did a late night show where he talked to the candidates about how that was going and made his commentary on that. And he's obviously contributed to the Guardian, an on and off column for some time. But when his comedic career ended, because no one would platform him because he was too offensive.
Again, I didn't know that either.
You're
ahead of me here. I didn't know Frankie Boyle's comedic career had ended.
Basically, yeah, he ended that and basically went full, I'm going to talk politics now. And he's done several projects in politics since. But, and he's a full-on, basically, JC 4PM supporter at this point. And he'll write opinion pieces which are basically a reflection of what his comedy sets would have been, i.e. not much substance, but they're quite funny to read.
So he's left comedy in order to spend more time with Owen Jones.
Basically, yeah, that's the general theme of it. I mean, he seems to be doing quite well. It's not like he's hard up for money, right? So I wonder if he's atoning. But it just reminds me that he made this one joke about John Prescott and how he looked like he was a one-man walking ball vagina. Well, and every time we mention him, I can't hear that joke. I can't stop hearing that joke.
To be honest, I think more than his comments about John Prescott and whatever, what amazes me of what you're telling me here, because I had no idea about this. Frankie Boyle was politically incorrect.
Yeah.
That was the whole thing. I mean, Frankie Boyle was, pretty much the most politically incorrect politician. But I think he was. I think I would even place him ahead of Jimmy Carr when it comes to lack of political correctness.
Mm-hmm.
And now you're telling me he is writing, political punditry in favor of a movement that has completely submitted itself to social justice and is advocating political correctness beyond anything else.
Let me read you the titles of his last articles that he's written. Let's forget Brexit and enjoy our last Christmas with running water. Is this the night of the living dead?
I'll need to abandon you now. The delivery. Right.
No problem. So whilst the Britisher does that, I'll read off the super chats. We'll get back to Frankie Boyle in a minute. Frankie Boyle is a vile champagne socialist, in my opinion. Agreed. It's such a shame because some of his comedy was actually pretty good back in the day. I can imagine a future world president Thunberg. Oh God, please no. Drunk Shovel says, as somebody whose hobby is to remember and teach about the Great War, today is special to me. Though America doesn't have Remembrance Day, the same as the Commonwealth and Britain, I'm pleased you started with that. Thank you. Oh, Drunk Shovel, thank you for your $20. That's more than generous. And yes, Remembrance Day is probably one of the most important days of the year to me. Yesterday was very somber for myself, and I'm just glad that so people appreciate that I did that and we're not put off the stream. I will ignore your super chat, Mr. Gently Benevolent, until the Britisher gets back. But yes, the new IKB4472 says, educate the boomer, educate him good. I should do my best. Mighty Balzac says, if biological sex doesn't exist, then where do babies come from? Asking for a friend. Well, I think you'll find they come from the shop down the road. Did your parents never tell you about the time they went to Asda, into the section of George, which involved all the babies? Yes. That's where you pick up your children. That is, of course, if you don't get a grow them yourself kit at home using a test tube. Pregnancy is a lie. It's clearly a conspiracy, and Any pregnant woman is just really, really into Doritos. Lundberg says, a quick explanation of the H index might be good. I will come back to that when Britisher returns, just so we can see what's going on there. And Object of Hate is talking about Britisher as well, so we'll see about that. In the meantime, I'll interact with the chat. Evening, folks. We've got about 270 people watching. It's a decent number. I'm quite happy to have you all here. What do we have? Greta Thunberg looking like Merkel by the time she gets elected to world president. Yeah. I've seen the mural that's going up in San Francisco, and it's just reminds me of basically the memes of Jesus is watching you masturbate. It's just one of those things where you're just like, Greta is watching your carbon emissions. Behave. The only thing that she needs now is like a halo and a scepter. And I'm curious. I need to do some research actually on the Middle Ages and how common child saviors were, because I'd be curious to see how someone like Joan of Arc, and how much control she actually had over being, say, the commander of the French Legion and stuff like that. Bill Whittaker, Frankie Boyle allegedly has a net worth over 3 million. I do need to talk about this in general, again, when the Britisher gets back, probably. But when Jeremy Corbyn is talking about, he used to talk about a millionaire's wealth tax, and he's now worth well over $1 million. And now it's a billionaire's wealth tax. And whenever I talk to any socialists, it always amazes me. I'm like, right, so if you've got all this money, right? Let's say you're not even a millionaire. Let's say you've got a net worth of, say, 500,000. So you've got enough of that in liquid assets. You've got a home; it's probably worth 300,000. Let's say you've got a home in the south. That is, you've got 200,000 in liquid assets at any one point, and somebody tells you that, so obviously at this point you're earning a decent amount anyway. But somebody comes up to you and says, "Oh, by the way, we're going to start taxing you 60% to 80% on your earnings when this new government comes in." Why would you not move? We are in a more interconnected, more communicable, more global world than ever before. So it doesn't matter. As long as you've got an internet connection, you can effectively live. I could live in China right now. And I know several people who live in China who are British citizens who go over there for work and then keep up to date with all the news from back home, because even with the Great Wall of China, the Great Firewall of China, they don't care. They basically have access to the internet, and the Chinese basically say anything that you're looking at right now is Western nonsense. We don't care. So they keep up to date with everything. They espouse from anything. They can send. Some of them have massive Twitter accounts that talk about British politics, and they can do all that because they have. They have the reach to do it. So if you're running a business, it doesn't really matter. You can stay abroad. You could fly in. It would be cheaper if your tax rate suddenly jumped from 40 to 60%. It would be cheaper for you to go live, I don't know, let's say in the EU or Ireland or something like that, and then commute back across whenever you needed to, pay the £100 or whatever it is to have a return flight and a hotel for a night if you need to deal with anything in the company. It's not difficult. And this is the one thing that people do not understand, is that if you're a billionaire, you have the capital and the freedom to live wherever the hell you want. It doesn't matter. Much like, I can't remember who it was, the British said, who basically decided to store something around in the region of £10 million worth of gold in different locations around the globe.
That would be Onassis.
Onassis, yeah. And so it doesn't matter. So if someone tells you if you're going to be taxed 80%, you just go, fuck you, I'm off to Costa Rica, and I'm going to enjoy my life where there is a much lower tax rate. I think it's ridiculous to otherwise assume. How's the grocery shopping, Britisher?
The grocery shopping arrived. I haven't put stuff in the fridge or whatever, but at least I didn't have any stuff for the freezer, so I could just pile it on a table and head back up here.
Mm-hmm. Marvelous.
But not before not without sort of arming myself with a glass of fruit juice.
Mm-hmm.
So because I'm pretty much run out of tea here, so anything to keep myself going.
Oh, that's a shame. I'm sure that you're going to remain conscious for the rest of the stream.
Well, I mean, it's of course aptly named fruit juice because this is mango juice that I'm drinking here.
Well, the Britisher has expensive taste, everybody.
And for people familiar with sort of mango juice or various other fruit juices that are available in certain supermarkets, there is a company, and it just, how should we say, the name of the company itself is just irresistible.
Mm-hmm.
It's called Rubicon.
Okay. Yeah, I know
it. Yeah. Has the penny dropped yet?
No.
No. Moving on. The chat will get it.
I hope that the chat will get it. Fruit juice, right? Sure. Your tea has clearly been taxed too much. All right, so I have a couple of super chats that have come through because I want to update things as we go, which say Britisher specific. So let me go here. Mr. Gently Benevolent said, "Couldn't your butler accept that delivery, Britisher?"
Oh, it's his night out.
Well, I mean, I'm right here.
Ravender and Jeeves are out, which is disgraceful. I mean, what should a man do who is abandoned by both his valet and his butler at the same time?
It's frankly an insult. The new IQB 4472 said that I should educate the boomer and educate him good. How do you feel about being called a boomer, Bridge?
What can I say? It's one of those things that had a certain edginess, and by now it's gone mainstream.
Okay, boomer.
And once it's gone mainstream, it doesn't possess any of that anymore. And I think that's what people often sort of forget when they embrace these things. What can I say?
Okay, boomer. That's what I have to say to that.
Well, it's like sort of politicians trying to be with it.
No, Britisher. No, Britisher. No more talk, Britisher.
Using terms like cool and wicked. They're somehow with the in crowd.
I have dismissed your opinion. Okay, boomer should have ended the conversation. Do you not understand the power of the statement? Yeah. Clearly, I'm not saying it with enough force. It's like, okay, boomer, okay. And for those of you who don't know, that is a Red Dwarf reference, but never mind.
I still think you need to be able to do it with a California accent for it to work.
Oh, I see. Or New Zealand, apparently.
But the okay is isn't that when the question is whether it is being uttered as a threat or not?
Okay. Yeah, I don't know.
We should do a Red Dwarf appreciation stream, I think.
It's like, are you threatening me? Are you threatening me, Lister? No, Rimmer. I'm saying, okay, Rimmer. Okay. Architect of Fate donated $2. Thank you ever so much, and says a 20-year-old Britisher invented cheese in a can. How could you, Britisher?
No, I refute that. That had nothing to do with me.
Really?
Really, absolutely.
The evidence is here.
I may have been the one who invented cheese, but I most certainly did not later introduce cheese in a can. No.
I mean, it's just the evidence is irrefutable. It says right here, the Architect of Fate is the strongest source that we have.
In the comment section, the evidence is irrefutable.
Irrefutable. Someone said it in the channel, in the comment section of my channel. Like, everybody knows that no one would dare lie, and that they all do an impeccable job of fact checking. So there we go. What do we have? Lumberg said to us...
What was that earlier you said about people being accused of things and therefore being thought guilty? I mean, in this very same live stream, you said that.
Oh, God, no, nothing, of course. That your accusation is baseless, Britisher. No, everybody knows that whatever the guests say means nothing, and everything that the chat says makes perfect sense. So here's something that I'm leaning on you here, Britisher, to help me explain. Lumberg donated £2 and said a quick explanation of the H index might be good. Do you know the H index?
The H index? I have absolutely no idea what that is.
That's really unfortunate, because I have absolutely no idea what the H index is either.
H index.
The power of Google says it is an author-level metric that attempts to measure both productivity and citation impact on the publications of a scientist or scholar. Oh right. Okay.
Okay,
Yeah,
yes, I'm
yeah,
with
yeah.
it. Yeah.
Okay. No, I thought it was in reference to something else completely different. But no, I have not.
You thought the H index referred to how hated any particular YouTuber is at any given time.
And
Yes.
and obviously you top out the top of that index, Britisher,
You know,
with a score, a perfect score,
yes.
a perfect score of 0.98. Yes, exactly. Only 2% of people are interested in what you have to say. No, I have not actually correlated the H index with my lecturers, but that's something I actually might need to have a look at. That'd be interesting. It's interesting that the top cited lecturer for my department has something around the region of 11,000 citations, but all of them come basically from 2 books on how to do qualitative research correctly. So let's, I guess that's something, I guess. But anyway, what was I saying? I've completely lost my.
I don't know. At some point, you got lost on people wanting to do a study on the people who do studies.
Yes,
Which that's
was
a
trying
sort of level of pedantry that leaves us sort of non-academics way behind.
Before we get back to Frankie Boyle, I have a couple of things that are Britisher specific. You see, so Object of Hate donated $5 Canadian, 5 CHF. Sorry, thank you very much. It says, Britisher, make sure you tell Granville that he's late, and you'll report him next time to Mr. Arkwright.
Arkwright and Granville. Just remind me here. I know the name, but I'm struggling here.
Oh dear. Okay.
Oh no, hang on, I'm with you. Open all hours, isn't it?
Yes.
Granville and Arkwright. Yes, of course.
Open all hours. The British have gone. David Jason.
It took a while to percolate through, but eventually it got there.
Well, at least it gave you the opportunity to use the word percolate, so there is that. The Invidious has DM'd us a picture which says 65 pence for all the food, my thrift. Invidious, obviously
yes, we're being kept abreast as to what this person is eating and how much it costs.
Let me see what I can put together. There we are. I'll if you've got the stream open, Britisher, it'll appear for you in anywhere between 12 and 30 seconds. But basically what I'm looking at is a slice of bacon, some ketchup, 2 eggs, a slice of toast, and some cheese with a pot of tea next to it. And that is 65 pence. I have some eggs downstairs. I'm really looking forward to making myself some eggs.
Well, I mean, all I can say is that we all agree that this person is obviously determined single-handedly to ruin the economy.
Ruin the economy by not paying for luxury goods at all.
Well, yes, because I mean, if everybody does that, everything sort of, immediately kind of goes into sort of economic permafrost, doesn't it?
Nonsense. What will happen is that the value of these basic goods will merely increase.
So please remember, folks, everybody listening out there, that it's the folks who are drinking mango juice who are actually keeping this economy afloat, whilst others who are only paying 62 pence for bacon, tea, and whatnot.
We all know
are endangering our economic survival and your jobs.
Britisher, we all know.
Vote Monster Raving Party now.
We all know that your grocery shopping consisted of slices of heavily seeded wholemeal toast and a metric fuck ton of avocados, and that is what was obviously put there for your smashed avocado on toast.
No. This is a complete misunderstanding. You see, my approach is entirely different. So basically, my delivery consisted first off of a large portion of whale meat, which came alongside of baby seal jerky.
Oh god, roast elephant.
Roast elephant and ground panda.
Roast liver of a. I'm trying to remember
rhino liver pate. Yes.
I'm trying to remember the Rimmer quote.
And of course, I ask them deliberately when delivering this to use the largest vehicle possible, and not to come via a direct route, but preferably go several times around in order to use the maximum amount of fuel possible. I call this my own personal Greta Thunberg effect.
I'm trying to remember what the quote is from Rimmer when he comes back from the future, and they're all despots who've been hanging around with fascist dictators and basically degenerates.
Better dead than Smeg.
Better dead than Smeg. Yes, in the last scene of one of the later seasons. But when he comes back and he's talking about the foods that they've been enjoying.
Oh yes, of course.
And he's like, roast suckling elephant, and stuff like that. Let me see what I can get up.
Yes, I think they're also baby seals and whatever feature, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh yes, baby seal livers and stuff like that. Oh, dolphin sweetmeats, roast suckling elephants, baby seal hearts stuffed with dove pate, food fit for emperors. That's what I'm hearing. Yeah, definitely. Oh yeah, that took way too long. Way too long to get.
So I think what you're basically identifying is that somewhere hidden deep inside me is of the inner workings of Arnold Rimmer. Yes.
Oh, obviously, yeah. Whenever I look at that pith helmet and the monocle, I just go fucking Rimmer. Yeah, you know.
Yeah. I always see myself in the position of the Rimmer at Waxworld. ready to lead the forces of goodness across the minefield.
It's like
I say lead. I mean lead from behind, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, exactly. Like I am the general who sits back in the tent enjoying.
It's always a glass of Sancerre, isn't it?
Yeah, a glass of chilled Sancerre. Meltdown. That was the episode, and. It's like, how many survived? Just about none of them.
It's a fairly round number, yes.
Yeah. Let me see if I can get the exact quote. It's like, and that's one of my favorite episodes because they shoot Winnie the Pooh. It's just like they've taken. It's like there's a firing squad. They're bringing someone out. It's Winnie the Pooh. He's refused the blindfold.
Given that episode, given the existence of that episode, I wonder how popular Red Dwarf is in China these days. Just you know, I don't know why that suddenly sprung to mind, but just wonder how many years imprisonment somewhere in a distant gulag you will get for being found to try and smuggle a copy of Red Dwarf
across the border. Yeah. Lister says, so you wiped out the entire population of this planet. You make it sound so negative, Lister. Don't you see? The deranged menace that once threatened this world is vanquished. No, it isn't, pal. You're still here. That's absolutely fantastic. Again, can't recommend Red Dwarf enough. And speaking of Red Dwarf, we have $5 from Nicholas Van Neel, who says $5 for the Red Dwarf appreciation stream. And Radical Liberation donating $2 saying, I'm up for a Red Dwarf stream. So clearly the market demand is here, Britisher. We'll have to do one of these commentary things where we watch an episode together, record the commentary, and then post it to YouTube so people can listen alongside. I mean, it's a done deal now. It's got to be done. I think we've knocked him out. I think the
no, I'm just busying myself, drinking mango juice. What
How
can I say? No,
dare you?
I was the one who suggested the Red Dwarf stream. Mind you, I'm not sure I would go for commentary. I think a stream of sort of advanced reminiscences regarding the many different facets and factors of Red Dwarf might be a good idea. I could well imagine that someone like, a gentleman we've mentioned once or twice before, Rubber might further enrich that particular conversation, as long as he is under strict orders never to mention Michael Gove.
Oh God, yes. Clearly the representation of Lister's confidence versus Lister's insecurity in this episode is an allegory for the strength of Michael Gove in Parliament.
Yes, precisely. And the decisive backstabbiness of Rimmer in this particular episode is...
Yeah.
Yes.
More reminiscent of Theresa May and the Brexit deal. Yeah, I can understand. I can see Davey1602 saying Seed Red Dwarf was light years ahead of its time. And it was. And the reason that it was way ahead of its time, aside from the general funniness of it, was there was definitely... It was at the time when the BBC was considering the social justice angle, and they were also considering the racial angle. But they cast, obviously, the Cat and Lister as ethnic minorities, as they described it, and this was a very conscious decision by the BBC. Don't ever have any doubt about that. But they never mentioned race once in the entire show, and it made it great because it meant that the characters could speak for themselves. I thought that it was Doug Naylor who came up with the main premise of the show. It was his baby, and I'm so glad he didn't allow it to be corrupted by politics, because it was properly done.
I honestly don't think it was ahead of its time.
No? You think it was a product of it?
Yes, I think it. When you look at what was produced in the 90s, there are some outstanding comedy programs, and therefore I feel it fell very much into that era. That this was kind of the sort of the last great hurrah of British comedy. And after that, yes, it became very grim very quickly.
Yeah, I can agree with that. I think to an extent. Mighty Balzac donated $2 says, Britisher, are you a fan of campaign furniture?
Campaign furniture?
Yes.
Are we talking, fold-up chairs and campaign tables, or what are we getting at?
Unfortunately, because I haven't been taking my pills this month, I've lost the ability to be completely psychic. And so I do not know exactly what Mighty Balzac is referring to here.
I am Googling campaign furniture as we speak.
Please feel free, Mighty Balzac, in the chat. No need to super chat to clarify what you mean by campaign furniture.
I mean, I'm looking at a British military officer's brass-bound campaign chest of oak and mahogany. I mean, if that's the sort of thing you're talking about, then I think most of us would be fans of campaign furniture.
Oh yes, no, I can get behind. There's a lot of cabinets. That's what I'm seeing on my my screen right now. No, I can definitely get behind that. I really want one of those really old style dressers, as it were. Sort of with the multiple drawers within a drawer, that sort of thing. Perhaps some secret compartments that have been machined in, that sort of thing. I'd really like one of those. But unfortunately, they cost about £10,000. It's really difficult to get hold of.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, who knows? In a month or two, if things go well on YouTube.
Oh, clearly, I'm going to skyrocket.
People get those super chats coming in. This poor boy here has got a £10,000 piece of furniture to buy.
But speaking of things, I will be running a stream probably tomorrow. Or no, not tomorrow, Wednesday. I'll be running a stream on Wednesday to do the merch designing and that sort of thing, and just chat with people. And I'm hoping to be able to produce a few more videos this week, because I've got the time. I finally finished getting the majority of my work out of the way, so that's all good. Daniel Marsden donated £2, £1.99 actually, through Super Chat, says, Epstein did 9/11. I mean... The evidence was there in front of us all along, wasn't it, Britisher? We knew.
Well, I mean, was anybody ever in any doubt?
So thank you for that.
What very few people know in that regard. I mean, most people know that Epstein did 9/11, but what most people don't know
is that Epstein did 2012.
Actually, George Soros money that financed it, and which had been funneled to Epstein by Alex Jones.
Oh, of course. In an effort, of course, to turn more frogs gay to drive his numbers through the roof, yes. The Harry Channel donated $5, says, Panda is the best tasting bear because it's a vegetarian. Ideally cooked over burning plastic milk jugs. Through Streamlabs. I always appreciate the fact that Harry Channel donates through Streamlabs, because I do actually end up keeping more of the money. So if any of you are curious, there is a link in the description to send money through Streamlabs. I do appreciate that. But yes, what do you make? Do you think panda's the best tasting bear? And how does panda compare to red panda when it comes to these sorts of things, Britisher?
Well, I don't know, but this may be the moment to shift the conversation. I don't know whether I've mentioned this before. If I have, everybody forgive me. But of course, anybody who is familiar with the writings of people like Esquemeling and various folk who told us about the 17th century buccaneers in the Caribbean, apparently, the Caribbean is named after the Caribs who lived on the sort of the smaller islands. And they were cannibals. And we know from back in the day when some of them met with some Europeans they didn't eat, that they were asked, well, I mean, given that you're eating folks like us, if they get stranded on your islands, who tastes best?
Yeah.
And apparently, according to the Caribs, it was the French.
Interesting, given that they subsist mainly on peasant dishes. That surprises me.
There is one particular thing that springs to mind there, which is kind of worth remembering, and that is the island of Guadeloupe, which the name suggests is something French. But back in those days, only one half of the island was occupied by the French.
Mm-hmm.
The other half was still occupied by the Caribs. So imagine you are living. You're a French. You're a French colonist on Guadeloupe, and one of your children goes missing for half an hour.
You'd be quite concerned.
Yeah, you'd more than likely be more concerned than if you were to be living in any other location, right?
Yeah, definitely. I can see, like, someone in chat. Sorry, I just got completely distracted. Rory Herbert in chat said, "My father started Panda Shandy and Panda Pops." Do you know Panda Pops? Because I know Panda Pops. I'm like, that's a neat piece of information to contribute to the stream. Good for him, I suppose.
This rings some sort of bell, Panda Pops. I'm looking it up as we speak.
It's one of those things that was popular for about 10 years. Yeah, that's one of the drinks of my childhood, right there. Yeah, definitely.
It was sort of one of those soft drinks that you might find in sort of the odd fish and chip shop, or anything that wasn't sort of like
it was cheaper than Coke, but not entirely crap. I do apologise. The tea is clearly affecting me.
I do hope in that case that Mr. Herbert will be able to acknowledge that ground up panda was used in Panda Pops, because otherwise we will be terribly disappointed.
In the same way that Coca-Cola originally featured cocaine in every bottle.
Yes. So I think there should at least be some panda. So please tell us that the population of Great Britain contributed to the reduction of the global panda population by drinking Panda Pops.
People in the chat saying clearly the French tasted best for the sheer amount of garlic. But also Chairman Pooh Bear, what a name, great name, says the Caribbean is named after its main export, the Carib bean. Do you believe that? I don't know if I can believe that. The Carib bean. Yeah, but thank you. Thank you for that comment. Tim Betts asks Britisher, is the mango juice fresh? Is it fresh mango juice?
It comes out of a carton, so I doubt
as fresh as the carton may be. You're not juicing mangoes in your own home, which obviously
no, I don't. I don't have some scullery maid somewhere hidden away who is busily juicing mangoes.
Your own home, which obviously spans several acres, right?
Well, I mean, of course, it's all surrounded by a large stone wall to keep the riffraff out.
What you want to do is eventually own a property which is large enough not to be considered a home, but an estate. So
when then finally I do come across some of the riffraff in the town centre and they tell me that they live on an estate, I can tell them that, well, so do I.
Oh, I see, yes. The difference is I live alone on my estate and you live with 2,000 other people, yes. I'm curious. I want to see you on Cocaine, Britisher. Would you do me the pleasure of the next time we run Fake Accents Unite, you'll take some Class A substances for us so that we can see what's going on.
Yes, it sounds like an interesting experiment. But as such, I am a very boring person in that regard. I have never taken any drugs whatsoever. I've never felt any curiosity towards them.
I'm going to find you. I'm going to hunt you down. And I'm going to shove cocaine up your nose.
You're going to feed me. You're going to feed me cocaine. I'm going
to have my hand over your mouth, push that cocaine up your nose, and make you inhale.
Ladies and gentlemen, may I just point out that the person who has just told me that he will find me and put his hand over my mouth is the same person whom we have just previously adored standing in public with his mouth taped up at some fetish event.
Let me point out as well, Britisher, that you are still a brain in a jar, a snow globe of sorts on my desk, and so the concept of you having a mouth is entirely ethereal, seeing as we both know that you have transcended the human condition. So there we go. I just hope that it amuses people in chat when they hear it when it comes through in a minute. So yes, we assume the mango juice is not fresh, Tim Betts. Thank you for that question. Explosive X donated €2.29. I hope that is relevant in some way, and says, "Have you seen the terrible US version of Red Dwarf?" Yes, I sat through the entirety of the US pilot for Red Dwarf, featuring Robert Llewellyn as Crichton, and it is the worst adaptation that I've ever seen, but also at the same time the most American adaptation.
Well, it was bizarre because you watch it and you just asked yourself, what exactly was it that they were actually trying to sell? Because here they had taken Red Dwarf and taken everything that made Red Dwarf unique out of it.
Yeah.
And you just felt, well, what was the point? You know, what were they actually thinking when they were doing this? That's what I would love to know.
Yeah, they basically took everything that made Red Dwarf quintessentially itself, removed it, and then injected, like, I remember, because I was watching the documentary at the time when they were discussing it, because it caused some bad blood, obviously, between the cast and Robert, who had gone off to do this show, basically without telling them. And he said, like, basically, they walked in, and the American version of Lister walked in, and he was, like, some sort of supermodel, you know, six-pack abs and all that jazz, and he basically, you know, talking in this suave way, and it's like, this is the antithesis of the working-class scumbag that Lister is designed to be at the beginning of the series, at least. You know, dealing with the fact that he's been alienated. It reminds me, actually, of the episode where they come out of the game, you know, the Despair Squid. And then the next group goes in, and there's the guy who's like, "Hey, Kachansky, shut up," and spits his cigar across the room, and then bends her over in the middle of the room and gives her a snog, you know, and it's just like, it's this larger-than-life absolute nonsense that's there. No, it was a car crash, an absolute car crash.
I mean, I know that the Americans do try to change things,
but it's
because the Americans try to tone things down and whatever. Because of course they try to do between 12 and 24 episodes per season, which is of course much less intense.
Yeah.
What the Brits do in kind of trying to distill all their ideas into 6 episodes in one season.
I'll also point out that a lot of the thing which made Red Dwarf work, especially in the early seasons, was that Craig Charles and I can't remember the name. Who was the chap who played Rimmer? Chris Barry.
Yeah.
Absolutely, in the first 2 seasons, certainly, could not stand each other. They could not stand to be in the same room as each other for longer than was absolutely necessary. And this played into the fact that Lister hated Rimmer because he was an absolute git, and Rimmer hated Lister because he was an absolute bum, right? Like that was just a beautiful relationship for the show. So
the antipathy actually was reflected in real life.
But it was reflected. I know they're good mates today, but they at the time, for the first 2 seasons, before they warmed to each other across the course of the show, where they go, actually, mate, we're doing all right. Like the show where it really turned around that I'm reminded of is the episode where Rimmer and Lister are trapped on the frozen planet, and there's the camphor wood chest with the soldiers and everything, and they bond, and it turns out that Lister burns a perfect guitar-shaped piece of camphor wood that he's cut out the back of the chest. Great episode, one of my favourites. And really, that it shows how much the characters have warmed to each other over the course of that episode, even though they're still arguing over stuff, and you can see like elements of it, especially when Chris left the show, and they basically have the episode where Crichton creates what is it called? Like the Rimmer experience. And they have the kind of like homoerotic dreams.
They have the snog.
They have the snog, the homoerotic dreams that Lister is having before all of that, and then they get through the Rimmer experience with that awful song that if you ever listen to the show, you ever listen to that thing, they have to say, Arnold, Arnold, Arnold Rimmer, more reliable than a garden strimmer, and it will be stuck in your head for weeks if you watch that show. Like it's just an awful song, but very catchy anyway. But enough about Red Dwarf. I'm sure we can find the time to do a retrospective where we discuss all this stuff. But yes, we have seen the terrible US version of Red Dwarf. Yes, it is much more of a serialized sitcom than is the British version. And it is horrendous, absolutely horrendous, but with a much larger cast. What was I going to talk about? Like, I had so many things that I wanted to talk about in terms of this. Oh, the only other, I have 2 big topics left, so we'll talk about those before we go. Farage has decided to stand aside his MPs in the Tory heartland. So 317 seats, I think it is, that Tories had previously won. He's decided to stand those aside, whereas before he decided he was going to field candidates in 600 plus constituencies. But since Boris Johnson is committed to pursuing a Canada-style trade deal, he's decided he's going to basically remove his candidates from the heartlands, or the 1 seats from the last election. I am sceptical about this in terms of its effectiveness, because as I saw on Twitter, it doesn't really change. Like, I don't think the Brexit Party was going to win in those constituencies or even lose in those constituencies if the Brexit Party stood. And I really think that the constituencies to play for, as it were, are the ones where a 5% swing, shall we say, would win the Tories the seat. And Farage is obviously not standing down in those constituencies because they were won by other parties. What do you make of this, Britisher, at all?
Well, I mean, it's all sort of tactical and double guessing, isn't it? At one moment, it's clear that he was coming under serious pressure, that people were sort of saying, look, you're endangering your own project here.
Yeah. And
that it might sort of undermine the credibility of the whole Brexit Party spiel, if you know what I mean. At the next moment, if he just abandons everything and in no constituency is seen to be in any way competing with the Conservatives, doesn't he then just become a extension of the Conservative Party?
Yeah. But he's not
which then undermines his ability to compete for Labour votes in Labour strongholds.
Because he would just be seen as Tory extension.
Precisely.
Also, interestingly, you have, because he's made this move, the Labour parties, the Labour Party and the Liberal Democrats, have been basically saying the opposite. Not the opposite, but by saying, they say, well, because Farage is supporting the Conservative Party, if you vote for the Tories in the constituencies we might lose, a vote for the Conservatives is a vote for Farage and his racist, misogynistic, homophobic policies, and that sort of thing. Because if he's throwing his weight, they're trying to pull the what might be called like the Nick Griffin or the Richard Spencer angle, where I can't remember who it was, like, because it was used last time by Conservatives, where the BNP decided that they said we're not going to field any candidates this year in the Labour constituencies, and people basically threw their weight behind that and said, like the BNP are not supporting Labour, are not contesting Labour-held areas because they think that it's going to accelerate, more people towards their group, which is going back into the thing where last year everyone was saying the left is the primary driver of people to the right, So I'm curious how well that campaign is going to go over with the Labour voters, because like anyone who's marginal, it doesn't really matter. They're going to weigh up the perspectives. They're going to select who basically represents them the best, or one would hope anyway. When it comes down to the wire, they'll find and make the time. But the people who are, going, I don't really like the way the Labour Party's going, but I voted Labour my entire life. I perhaps come from a Labour family. As soon as they hear, the Tories have slid even further to the right, they've gone more, more towards Farage. Farage supports them, and they support Farage. So don't vote for them. I feel more like they are going to. It's going to be more effective with those people. Do you know what I mean?
Well, I mean, one of the things that hasn't happened is that the Conservatives have not accepted a pact.
Mm-hmm.
So this has come entirely from Farage, because one of the problems with the previous offer of the pact was that the Conservatives cannot accept such a thing.
Yeah.
Because the moment that the Conservatives accept such a thing, they become responsible for everything the Brexit Party might do.
Mm-hmm.
Because anything they do will then be thrown back at them, as in,
they're your allies.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, therefore, the Conservatives are not in a position, and in the same way as the Labour Party are not in a position to kind of make these pacts. It can't be done. So this has now happened without, in a way, Conservative agreement. It may well have been agreed with the Tories behind closed doors, if you know what I mean. But this is not an official pact between the Brexit Party and the Conservatives.
No. They were aiming for that, but clearly,
I think
the
Brexit Party wanted that, but the Conservatives, I think, just made it absolutely clear
that
was not going to happen.
I think that this is where this move has come from, where Farage wants to signal to the Brexit Party voters that he's happy enough with the Conservative Party deal, that they should throw their weight behind it, but at the same time, he's trying to associate himself with the Conservative Party in a way which will satisfy everyone who's Tory light but more pro-Brexit than the current Tory party is.
I think his main worry is simply that he would get in the way of Brexit himself.
Mm-hmm. And I think he's well aware that he's a pressure group, not a party, as well.
Yeah.
So,
and I think that was beginning to show that one has got there is a problem here. So I think this was kind of his way of sort of trying as best as possible to kind of move out of the way of what otherwise, what boulder might be coming his way.
Yeah.
Because yes, he's a pressure group. He is not looking to be an MP himself, which I think tells a lot. Because let's face it, of all the people who would be standing, he would be the one who would have the best chance of winning anything.
Yeah.
While standing for the Brexit Party. And I think it's quite clear he is not interested in being a backbench MP for the next 5 years. And therefore he's just made it quite clear right from the beginning, no, I'm not standing.
I was watching Laura Kuenssberg's coverage of this move by him earlier this morning, and what I found really interesting was her entire feed was filled with, because she'd watched Joe Swinson basically say to vote for Tories is to vote for Farage, and so many people who were like, "Oh, the right-wing media," and it got me thinking about our conception at the moment. Like, my conception at the moment is that the media is primarily left-wing, but it got me like, the newspapers are generally right-wing, but the mainstream media overall, I was looking at going, it's got a left-wing bias, and I was just so confused in effect of just looking at this like whole list of comments of people going, "Oh, the right-wing mainstream media is showing its teeth again. Oh, you should shut up and just do your job, and you don't even do it well," and that sort of thing. I was curious whether or not you had an opinion on this, given that I feel like at the moment I'm trapped in rhetoric from both sides.
Well, I mean, on what exactly? On the nature of the media, or how the media reacts to Farage?
So Laura Kuenssberg says in a tweet, "Right on cue, another one. Senior Labour figure using Farage's decision against PM," and it's got Keir Starmer saying, "A vote for Boris Johnson's Conservatives is a vote for Nigel Farage's politics. The stakes could not be higher." And all the comments just going things like, "This is true. Very poor taste for the media to try to score points off this."
Well, I mean, the left. I mean, put yourself in the position of the left.
Yeah, I'm trying my best.
How are you going to try and win this? And I guess it's fair to say the one way you are going to try and do this is by trying to tie the Tories to things that are not popular.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it's easy to sort of, if one is in the Brexit bubble and whatever, to convince oneself that Nigel Farage is terribly, terribly popular. But he's not really.
No.
In the greater scheme of things, he's not really that popular. Yes, I could well imagine that he might be one of the politicians one might want to go and have a pint with at the pub.
Mm-hmm.
But as such, there are a great many in this country that absolutely despise the man.
Mm-hmm.
In that respect, someone like Boris Johnson is someone who much more bridges the divide, if you know what I mean. Even though he too, I mean, there will be some people in this country who just hear Boris Johnson speak, and their blood will be up because he is so painfully posh. And I mean, that's the one thing that it works even more against Jacob Rees-Mogg. So, you have to kind of understand the limits of these folks. Have you also noticed how one is, for example, trying desperately to tie the two of them to Trump? So Boris Johnson and Nigel Farage, both of whom seem to get on well with Trump, so one is effectively trying to say, oh, well, a vote for Farage or for Boris Johnson is a vote for Trump. Why? Because Trump, by and large, isn't popular in this country. So that's the tactic. That's what one is trying to do.
That is something which, again, like the popularity of certain figures and everything. Like, I'm quite cognizant of the fact that I don't want to get trapped in a bubble where I go, this person is much more unpopular than is perceived. I'm really concerned about trying to get an accurate view of how popular certain positions are in the UK culturally. And it's a real trouble. It's a real problem because, obviously, I live and I work in a university, and obviously that's heavily left-wing bias. Most of what I read is centre-right, right-wing media. and what I get from that is a different perspective entirely, and trying to keep everything accurate is just an absolute nightmare. I'm finding, because you look at things and you go, right, well, I've got four or five sources which are all saying the same thing. Okay, this seems like it must be relatively accurate for me. And then later on down the line, you go, actually no, that might be. I wish I had an example for you right here, but the T, I mean the Desperados, I mean the T is not helping me remember. So it's a difficult one. How do you find yourself balancing, I should say, Britisher? Do you just avoid media in its entirety and formulate your own opinions?
No, I think you can't avoid media, because media, that's where the information comes from. I mean, I remember, way back when, being at school, us having, lessons on how to read the media through a filter.
Mm-hmm.
But as long as you're aware what the bias of a particular media outlet is, then you can still use that media outlet to, in a way, gain the main central information.
Which is interesting as well, given that the BBC always prided itself on its reputation of being, let's call it unbiased.
Yes.
Kind of, and now both sides are just accusing it of bias in each way. I don't think the BBC can win in this altercation.
Yes, but I think I smell a rat with some of the left-wing accusation of right-wing bias by the media.
Mm-hmm.
I
I have left-wing friends, who have directly said to me, and said, "Oh, there's this source that you're talking about from the BBC. Oh, the Brexit Bias Corporation," and I'm like, "I'm sorry."
Yeah, to me, I smell a rat. I think that one is deliberately accusing the BBC of bias, of a right-wing bias, in order to counteract the much more valid complaints of a left-wing bias.
I think it's quite often the accusations of a right-wing bias come from selecting a particular pundit or presenter and taking something from a private, a private message or a tweet that they've made, and go, "Oh, this is the right-wing bias showing," as opposed to, when it comes to the left-wing bias, I'm much more likely to see clips from the actual broadcasts themselves.
I think, sort of over the years of watching the BBC, I have seen them kind of change considerably over time. So, I remember years and years ago there was always an accusation of there being a left-wing bias, and I sort of remember, what were they called? The Hamiltons, wasn't it? That couple.
Oh, yeah.
I remember back in their sort of heyday when he was still an MP and whatever. I remember her talking about them being communist and this, that, whatever. That was complete nonsense. That was nonsense. And I think that hasn't helped. The fact that there are still a great many people in whose living memory the political right was jumping up and down, crying wolf, when in fact it wasn't so, doesn't help now when it is blatant. But obviously a great many people remember that, those sort of things having happened and having been said. And yes, it simply wasn't the case then. Yes, of course, there will always have been, something where one could allege bias this way or that way. But the attempt was there. One was clearly trying to be unbiased. Now there is absolutely no attempt whatsoever.
No.
It's ridiculous.
Absolutely.
But I must say, I must say to their credit, by and large, they get the facts right. Do you understand what I mean?
Yeah,
so
it's the interpretation of the facts that is biased, but the
precisely. So
the
you can still actually watch. You can watch it through the filter of knowing that what you will be getting will be bias, but nonetheless you are getting the basic facts about somebody having been killed in Hong Kong or whatever. So you get that, but then how that is then interpreted, that is then left to
You mean,
BBC bias. But as long as you know that bias is there,
far
then
right,
they're not manipulating you.
Far right racist protester is murdered in Hong Kong, facing against the glorious centrist government of China. That's what we get.
But I think So if you see, if you read the Daily Mail, then you have got exactly the opposite. Everything on the right will be glorious. Boris Johnson is the second coming. Jeremy Corbyn is Stalin. We know how these things.
This is a family-friendly stream, Britisher. I don't want to know about Boris Johnson coming. That's what I'm saying. Okay.
But you clearly have got these perspectives, and it's fairly obvious.
Yes.
I do agree with you that the left-wing dominance of the BBC, because it's really that, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's not so much the Guardian; it's the BBC.
Yeah.
Because the BBC is such a behemoth, it dominates the media landscape utterly. And given the fact that all the other broadcast media, however minor they are in comparison to the BBC, such as Channel 4, ITV, Sky Channel, the fact that they are also deeply, deeply infused in their news broadcasting with exactly the same virus, if you know what I mean. It's obvious. They, in a way, these days, outplay the print media. The print media is still very, very important, particularly when it comes to setting the agenda in what actually matters in reporting.
Yeah.
But the print media, you take the Guardian and the Mirror out of it, and everything is right-leaning.
Yeah.
So, historically, there has always been the accusation that it was the print media that always influenced elections. Whereas now, one could hardly say people will be voting Conservative because of the Sun, when at the same time they are seeing an avalanche of left-wing bias coming towards them on BBC Radio, on BBC websites, and on BBC television.
I would agree. I'm going to move us on now, though. But I think we agree on that one. Jack donated 20 CZK through Super Chat. Thank you ever so much. It says, thoughts on the Spanish election. Now, all I know about the Spanish election is that it's pretty much a deadlock between the centre-left and the general right. It's the Vox party, which is considered to be the far-right anti-immigration party. But I don't know if it's actually far-right or not. All I know is that, if the Guardian calls it far-right, it's unlikely to be far-right. It's just...
Well, I think this is one of the problems we're all facing. Mm-hmm. And by the way, CZK, I think, are Czech krona.
Nice. Yeah.
And perhaps the person who's paying in Czech krona, was it Jack, you said?
Yep.
Perhaps he can tell us why and when they actually changed their name to Czechia from the Czech Republic.
Oh.
Because that was the first thing I knew was that watching some football match, they were suddenly called Czechia. And I was going, what? When did this happen?
We've got Chechnya, the Czech Republic, and now Czechia. It's like, God.
So it's obviously some takeover bid for Chechnya, isn't it? But back to the subject, the Spaniards. I think we're all suffering from exactly the same problem.
Yeah.
This is it. The AFD, far right.
They actually gave
in Spain, far right. So much is being called far right, of which we don't know the background.
Yeah.
And that makes it very, very difficult. So when people kind of are dismissive about...
it's always a smear.
The Rassemblement National in France.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, no, they call everybody far right. Well, yes, but they actually have got a history of being far right.
At some point, there's got to be some people who are actually far right, and they will be demonized as far right, and the difficulty is going to be in passing that. And the problem is, when it comes to the left, is that if you call everybody far right, it's the cry wolf situation. Nobody knows who actually is, and
that's exactly, I think, where most of us find ourselves. That some of these parties that are being accused of being far right, because let's face it, it's an accusation. It's not just basically putting a tag on them.
It's
if you know
just
what I mean.
it's just a shaming tactic. And
The problem simply is that given that you cannot know the political background of all these countries, it's impossible.
You don't have the time. This is why we have media outlets in the first place. They're supposed to pass this information for us.
And then, we get just, far right. And you just go, well, the only way I can now is if I dedicate several hours of research.
Yeah.
You cannot do this for Holland, for France, for Italy, for Spain, for Czechia, to name a country. To some extent, you need to rely on the media. But this is just it. When I say you can read the media through a filter and discern the facts, but when it comes to something like the accusation of far right, that's when you're stumped.
Yeah.
Because is that fact or is that interpretive?
I'm getting information now that the Vox Party, which is the Spaniards, are basically Spanish monarchists. And it's one of only 2 actual monarchist parties in Europe, alongside the People's Party of Spain.
Well,
so,
but again, whence is that coming? That's the problem. This is very, very difficult for us to, So when one thing I would love them to do, when they give us tags like far right, is if they would give us an example of, well, here are 1 or 2 of their far right policies, and then you could sort of read that and you would go, okay, yeah, that makes sense.
Yes, when they say stab all the Polish in the streets, it makes sense,
if you give us some sort of indication of what would actually define this far right identity.
Mm-hmm.
But because then you're left with something that seems interpretive, and in the end you're just completely stumped, and you end up with this position in which you can't make your mind up.
It's become
simply because you don't have any information on which to act.
It's become meaningless to the point where you become kind of blasé about it. You don't even become dismissive and go, right, well, if they've called them far right, therefore I must support them. What you end up doing is saying, they've been called far right, therefore I don't know. And I don't know to such an extent that, what the fuck can I say about this?
But I must say that I have also observed that on the right, that some people then embrace anything that is then called far right, because, it's automatically a lie.
Yeah.
And you go, not necessarily.
Well,
some of those folks there on the continent are really, truly nasty when it comes to, if you see some of those parties.
I was talking to some Brazilians actually about Bolsonaro and the effects of his policies in the real world, and they were just like, yeah, it's not been great, basically, and you just go like, I mean, come on, like, you can't support everything when they go on, because it's like, oh well, the Democrats in America hate Bolsonaro more than anyone else. It's just like, you can't just say, he's based on these 1 or 2 issues, therefore we support everything. There's got to be some more nuance there. It's such a shame, because I feel like it's muddying the water to such an extent that they don't even realize that by doing this in the object,
in the long term, they're going to undermine the whole thing.
Yeah, the object of the media should be to make things as transparent as possible. You should be aware of where the biases lay, and you should also be aware of what things are. And if you don't do that, you're going to end up with a lot of confusion, which is going to end up to undesirable outcomes.
You must have heard the government of Hungary being described as far right.
Orban and all that. Yes.
Yes. Yeah. So this is sort of one of the questions that I would ask is, well, what does far right mean in that case? So if I ever come into the context where someone has accused me of being far right, I always have to say, please define far right for me, because that means absolutely fuck all otherwise. It drives me mad. If you just simply Google Jobbik, Jobbik, and just look at the nice imagery that comes up. Now that is Hungarian, and that doesn't look too healthy.
No, that's quite Mosley-esque. Yeah.
If I look at those pictures, That's where I see the far right. These are people, dressing up as Boy Scouts with their banners and standards and looking terribly militaristic. We know what we're looking at there. That's the far right. There's no doubt about it. But what I would like to know, as somebody who knows nothing about Hungarian politics, and I would assume just about 99.9% of people listening are in the same boat, in what way does Viktor Orban, whom the Western media refers to as far right, what way
what does he
actually, is he a parallel to that?
Yeah.
And that's where it always breaks down. And at one moment, you don't just want to dismiss it, because we know that sort of nasty stuff out there exists. As I say, we haven't made up Jobbik. No. They're out there. They're real.
It puts all the mental effort on the listener or the reader or anything like that, and as opposed to anything else. It's like, oh yes, well, we, the people who are going to be comfortable with, the general left, as it were, are not going to need to do any more further research. They're quite happy. They can scream JC for PM all they like. But the people in the middle, who are the people who, with every election, say, am I left wing? Am I right wing? Am I doing this? Am I doing that? Am I taken in by this? Am I not doing this? Those people, it's basically like trying to make as much work for them as possible, and to the point where it becomes an untenable situation to research this, and so you say, right, well, I'm going to have to go with your label here and say better safe than sorry, no thanks. Very difficult. Yes. Let me just have this last one. Ganja Bob Flankist donated £5 through Super Chat, says, the left-wing media never denounces themselves, the left. The right-wing media always demonises anyone to the right of themselves. See the Mail smear piece on Wife with a Purpose. So yes, I would say that at present, because I don't think it's true historically, at present the right is willing to attack further to the right and to the left, whereas the left can just attack anyone to the right of themselves and say, these are all horrible people. Do you know what I mean?
By the way, can you check your connection for your headphones or whatever? You're sometimes giving us a bit of a sort of a fuzzy sound.
I apologise for that. I will see what I can do. Okay. My headphones seem to...
It almost sounded as if the jack wasn't quite in.
Okay, I've adjusted the cable now. We'll see how that goes. Yeah. The buzz is apparently now gone, so we'll see. Apologies for those people who had to suffer through the buzz. But yes, do you see what I mean, Britisher?
But no, I mean, I think we're very much on the same page when it comes to these definitions. When it comes to lashing out to the right and lashing out to the left, I think it very much depends on what. When you can't say that the let's take the Conservatives as the classic example. You can't say they never lash out to the left, because all you need to do is give them 2.5 seconds into a speech by John McDonnell about spending and things like that, and they will go off, if you know what I mean. So it's more a question of, in areas of the culture war and whatever. That's where they're terribly, terribly worried about lashing out towards the left, whereas they're quite willing to go towards the right. So I think it's more in certain spheres that applies, rather than it being, categoric. Because when it comes to, as I say, when it comes to Jeremy Corbyn or John McDonnell or Diane Abbott, I don't think there's a shortage of willingness by the Tories to have a go at them.
People are telling me, by the way, Britisher, that they changed the name to Chechnya in 2016. There you go.
Oh, well, there we go.
Yes, no, I think we're on the same page. So moving on, I do have one last story for this evening, which is that Count Dankula released a video today which says he's leaving UKIP. And I myself have been contemplating this for a while, and yes, I have cancelled my membership. I have left UKIP. I think it's fallen to the infighting. Basically, the main reasons that he gave were people fighting over the scraps of power for the Iron Throne of UKIP, as it were, and what little that meant at the time. And now it's a party with zero political appeal to even the people who are hardworking in that party trying to make it work. Unfortunately, it's got nowhere to go unless it had some really radical reform, and I don't see it happening. As someone who ran a political organisation that was considerably smaller, like when I was running the Liberalists, it's the same kind of death throes infighting that I see, and I fully expect UKIP to die within the next year, and then try and find a new home. The people within it will try and find a new home, and a new party may rise. But I cannot, in good conscience, support UKIP. Did you see this coming, Britisher, or were you just always a skeptic?
I mean, it more than likely seemed inevitable, did it not? I mean, I would say it pretty much seemed inevitable from the moment that Farage left UKIP and started his own venture.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, and one could see, at that moment, one could see the air leaving the balloon. And the moment it went into such a sort of deflation, one couldn't really see how it was going to turn itself around.
Mm-hmm.
And at some point, I guess, somebody kind of needed to bite the bullet, and in this case, it seemed to have been Count Dankula, who I think was kind of the sort of the unwitting Pied Piper, who, as a joke, kind of led everybody else in.
Yeah.
And who is now basically speaking out and saying, "Well, look, why don't we just go the other way and leave and take the exit?"
Yeah. I mean, it's something I've been considering for a while. It's such a shame. They basically died a death at their Southeast conference that they had, and then everything went downhill from there. Unfortunately, I look at it and I just go, you've made your own bed and you now need to sleep in it. The NEC was a huge problem, which is interesting because at the time, when I joined, it was one of those things where it was like, look, we have an NEC. Nigel Farage doesn't want an NEC. They keep, we're more democratic by having an NEC. But I mean, it's just they completely ruined so much. It was such a shame, really, because they had potential and they let it fall to they had the opportunity to reinvent themselves as the party of free speech, and they didn't successfully manage to do that. And then it became a power grab, and so there it goes.
Well,
and now they have no power at all.
In that respect, how many people were in UKIP prior to the arrival of the YouTube lot that were really significantly dedicated to free speech? And I know people will say, "Oh yes, it was it was one of their policies," but
so it's interesting. You're right
for banging the free speech drum.
You're correct in the sense that UKIP had around 20,000 members. The YouTube crowd brought in an extra 10,000, which pushed them over into the black financially. But the overall sense that I got was like the party was morphing, and they didn't want to morph into the free speech party, and so they left, and that was the end of that. I'm sorry for the buzz, folks. There's not much I can do about it. I don't know what's causing it. I'm moving my microphone around. So much as I think it's a shame, when it comes to free speech now, I don't really know what to do. I'm planning on having a chat with Marcus Dankula later this week, and we're basically gonna have a talk about how we're doing and what we're going to do about it, and whether or not there's any alternatives to free speech, whether or not it's worth founding a new party, but at the same time, it's more about trying to generate on the ground interest in free speech again, because I think we're at a period of time in history where it needs to become clear to people why free speech is valuable, and I do not think we're going to get there without a period of time where people do not have free speech and they realize it.
If I can be sort of the cynic, I think any attempts at parties and whatever at the moment, I think that is much too early. I think it's a question of making the case, and I think that needs to be made. And in all fairness, I think that is more than time is more than likely better spent on platforms like YouTube and whatever, making the case for these things, trying to persuade people about precisely these sort of things. I'm supporting each other in that venture.
I'm trying not to be nihilistic here, Britisher, but I don't know, because it's all down to a mixture of factors. One of which is where people derive authority from, and the second of which is basically a public interest in keeping your information and your opinions valid. So, in the same way that social media has led to people basically not giving a shit about personal information security, in the same way that, say, in the 80s, people might have said something along the lines of, why on earth do you need my phone number? Whereas now people give out their phone number a dozen times a week in order to, sign up for various apps or whatever, and it's all convenient. I think that a large number of people, a very large number of people are perfectly willing to sacrifice their freedom of speech because they know they're not going to say anything particularly controversial, as far as they're aware, and they're not really going to think about it. They're just going to get on with their lives, and it's going to be convenient for them because they'll get, say, an increased amount of security from it. They certainly won't have to deal with anything that would challenge their worldview. Very difficult to tell those kinds of people that actually, don't you see how much fun and how much interest that how valuable it is in the most secure and safe period of history in all of the history of humankind, where we haven't had war in this country for over 50 years, that actually it's worthwhile you having these protections and for your opinions and these sorts of things. I don't see it happening at the moment. I think a threat would either need to arise, which would make people cognizant of why they need to be aware of this stuff, or it would need to rise to the point where someone on every street was being arrested for their opinions.
Well, in all fairness, I don't think it needs that. No. I understand what you mean. Once people begin to feel it.
Yeah.
I think it's something else. Something has to happen, perhaps a bit like the Dankula case, but something which actually grabs the public imagination. And then you are there sooner than you can blink. And the political pressure is there instantly.
Yeah, I do think things move very quickly when they move.
Yes,
as it were. Any country's 3 days from revolution.
I think the idea of we need a party. You will only ever end up with a tiny little party. So it's a bit like UKIP without Farage, if you know what I mean. Which, in a way, it grants you the impression that you are doing something and that you are, you've got a sort of a party machine. But given that it has zero power and zero outlook of power, it might as well not exist. Do you understand what I mean? Because in the end, parties are only useful if they are able to leverage power.
Yeah.
And if they are some tiny little operation, then that's just not going to happen.
No. They may as well just be a pub group,
Yes, yeah, and in that respect, given that I have banged my head against brick walls in the past, people will know about my sort of ill-conceived foray and 25 years ago, more into the Lib Dems when I actually thought they were, that the liberal meant something.
I'm trying very, very hard at the moment to not consign myself to the position of, shall we call it the shotgun activist, where I consign myself to the fact that I've lost, and when they come for me, I'm not going to go lightly. That's as far as it is.
I think we have to be. I think we have to be careful about that. It's not as if we're all about to be arrested. That's not how bad it is.
No, not now. Maybe not now,
yes.
But give it 5 years.
Yes, but this is just it. That once it becomes that bad, then it's too late, and it's not too late for us. It's too late for them.
Yeah, I'm
because
trying very hard.
The moment it would get anywhere near that bad, any regime that were still then in charge would be toast.
I'm glad that you're optimistic,
and folks, they would be toast. We wouldn't need guns for that. The thing is that it's this salami tactic approach. The basic one little slice, one tiny thin little slice. That's exactly what you were referring to with giving out your phone number for social media and things like that. It's that sort of, they acclimatize you to it because you never. This is why guns are not an argument in so many of these debates. When some American always tries to tell me, well, if you had guns, and you just go, no, because how many people should Count Dankula have shot when they came to arrest him? It just doesn't work that way.
Certainly not in Britain.
But the moment, as I say, the moment something moves, it moves unbelievably fast. And in that respect, given that we've just had the 30 years of the Berlin Wall coming down, I mean, I was around. I witnessed that.
The 20-year-old Britisher took the first brick out of the Berlin Wall.
The idea of how fast that moved, it was unbelievable. So here was something that had been around forever.
Yeah.
Nobody could envisage anything changing in that respect. It was set in stone. The Iron Curtain was just simply there. That was the way the world was. Okay, Gorbachev maybe trying to do reforms. That already is spectacular. And then suddenly, I think, one day the Hungarians basically announced that they were not going to stop people going over the border. And within something like a period of 24 to 48 hours, the whole thing collapsed. It was unbelievable. Just how quickly your world can change. Because it wasn't that, oh, well, they've got guns, they are going to shoot the communist leaders. No, it's the moment the support structure just begins to crumble, it's gone. And it happens incredibly quickly. And that's what I mean, that something needs to happen that actually galvanizes the desire, that basically gets people to realize, dear God, something needs to happen, and it has to happen now. And it doesn't necessarily mean that Cousin Winnie has to get arrested and Cousin Jennifer needs to be carted off. No, it doesn't necessarily need to touch everybody, because with us living in such an interconnected world, the moment that some, I don't know, disabled woman in a wheelchair gets dragged down the street by police for being arrested for having told a joke on Twitter, that sort of thing, that it spreads like wildfire. And within 24, 48 hours, the entire political climate has changed, and all those who have spent a lifetime advocating for censorship are suddenly dead in the water. That's what I'm hoping for. That's what I'm waiting for.
I
really don't believe that kind of political party politics can get us there.
I think the vast majority of people will go calmly as lambs to the slaughter if they're acclimatized slowly enough. Unfortunately, and I'm not saying that I have a solution. I'm not even saying that I have the inklings of one. It's just something that I've been considering for a year. But no, thanks for your perspective anyway, Britisher. It's certainly a lot to think about, despite the fact that chat seems overwhelmingly to say, the British is delusional. You sound like a proper lefty secondary school teacher. Wake the fuck up before Corbyn issues every UK citizen £100 a week salary.
Corbyn is not going to win. There's no chance of Corbyn winning. I'm sorry. I know there's been some movement in the polls here, there, this, and whatever. He's not going to win. The closer Corbyn would get, the bigger the chance of suddenly a panicked reaction 24, 48 hours before the polls and the whole, the actual polls, the actual election, and things suddenly going in the other direction. He is not going to win, folks.
I admire your optimism, Britisher.
It's like saying Michael Foot is going to defeat Margaret Thatcher. That's what you're looking at. The only reason it came close last time round was because we had one of the deadest ducks in British political history leading the Conservative Party. That was responsible for that. When she went into the election, the prognosis was that she should have something like a 100-seat majority in the Houses of Parliament. And she wrecked it with sheer hubris with that manifesto and absolutely sunk herself and took the Tory party and the whole Brexit thing with it. Now it's a different game.
Mm-hmm.
Now, unless Boris Johnson repeats the same calamity, unless, I don't know, the earth breaks open and the Beelzebub comes out from the netherworld, as such, you look at it and any political experience, I'm sorry, Boris Johnson is going to win this. There is no way that Corbyn is going to
I would agree.
Implement communism in Britain.
I see the Tories winning. The question is how far the Tories have fallen, but also what they actually stand for.
Have you seen some of those posts on Twitter?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what it was. Is it Leave? Is it the Leave campaign? I don't know. They're kind of putting out some messages on Twitter. So you're getting Amber Rudd, who is not standing,
mm-hmm.
and then you get the candidate instead who is now standing for the Conservatives, who is a Brexiteer, and then you've got Gork, who again wasn't he one of them fired from the Conservatives by Boris Johnson, and again it might also apply to Amber Rudd. I'm not sure, but Gork again. I don't know if he's been deselected or if, in any case, there is now a Brexiteer candidate standing in that constituency. So you can see these things. The old guard is effectively being shunted aside. Parliament is going to look considerably different.
I hope so, because I'm sick to death of all the familiar faces at the moment, I have to say.
And you basically, even if there will be some people still within the backbenches of the Conservatives who would be, what some people would refer to as the wets, or others would call the moderates, or whatever, they will know that the government that has come to power has a given mandate. And given that the new makeup of Parliament and the new political setup, they will not be in a position ever to create, this sort of mess again. So this isn't me saying, oh, it's all going to be wonderful sunshine and this and whatever. In fact, if the Conservatives win with too great a majority, that will then throw up problems of its own.
Oh, no doubt. We're still going to be in a job, Britisher. Don't worry about that.
Well, no, it's simple. The moment you give the Tories too much leash, then suddenly the censorial nature comes to the fore. All these things that apparently don't exist anymore because they're actually totally in favour of free speech, we are told. Yada, 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 yada. All that then suddenly gets buried, and suddenly one wants to, combat degeneracy and other sort of nonsense. You just give them enough leash and they will do that. And if they have a very large majority, if Boris Johnson swans into Downing Street with over 100-seat majority after the next election, you can suddenly see things coming down the line which could be complete nightmares. But we will cross that bridge when we come to it.
I agree. And on that note, I believe it is time to end. Matchstick does donate $2 and says, this is for the Britisher's American accent. So thank you very much. So thank you very much for that, Matchstick. But yes, it is 11. We have been going for nearly 2.5 hours now. Very much appreciated to everyone who stuck with us for the entirety of the show. Thank you very much for joining me this evening, Britisher.
It's been an honour and a privilege, as usual.
And thank you to everyone else in the chat. I think it's definitely time to go and sort out a lunch. But I will see you all hopefully on Wednesday with a new video. And until then, just have a great week and good luck with all your controversial political punditry and stressing about the state of Britain and beyond that is going on in the world right now, because it's a bit of a mess, but all the best. Oh, the Mad Mercenary says, please remember my picture. Yes, I will definitely. Let me check my messages on Twitter. No, on Discord. Let me open this link. And hopefully you should all see this picture here, which comes up. And it's a picture of Winnie the Pooh in a Nazi uniform being taken away. So there you go. Thank you all very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the stream. If there's anything you want to see from me, myself, or the Britisher in future, please do let us know in the comments. Still keen to do that merch stream, a Red Dwarf stream, now apparently in the calendar, and we'll let you know. Good evening, everybody, and take care.
Toodle pip. So, about the Romans.